At 8:14 a.m. on June 22, 1944, Unteroffizier Klaus Vogel sat behind the stone masonry of a Norman bell tower. He felt untouchable. From his elevated perch, the world was a grid of bocage and death traps. Vogel was a professional, a veteran of the Eastern Front, and he knew that as long as the morning mist clung to the fields, no American rifleman could spot the faint glint of his Zeiss optics. He poured a lukewarm coffee, confident in the superiority of German reconnaissance. In the next 52 seconds, Klaus Vogel would be dead. 400 yards away, tucked into a shallow trench filled with 6 inches of stagnant, oily rainwater, sat Private First Class Silas Vance. He wasn't looking through an official piece of Army hardware. He was squinting through a piece of trash. This is the story of a moment that flipped doctrine on its head. It is the account of a modification that was explicitly forbidden by the rigid hierarchy of the War Department, an improvised piece of civilian logic that would eventually silence 14 of the Reich's most lethal marksmen in a single afternoon. Silas Vance didn't come from the hallowed halls of West Point. He came from the sooty coal breakers of West Virginia. In the mines, if a machine broke and the replacement part was 3 weeks away by rail, you didn't stop working, you improvised. Silas grew up fixing the unfixable with scrap tin, solder, and sheer intuition. He understood the anatomy of light and how it behaved in dark, cramped spaces. He knew how to baffle a lantern so it threw light forward without revealing the man holding it. When he enlisted in 1942, the Army saw a scrawny kid with steady hands, but during marksman training at Fort Benning, his instructors were baffled. Vance would spend his evenings filing down trigger groups or using soot from a candle to black out his sights. His sergeant called it vandalism of government property. They saw a soldier who refused to respect the standard issue field manual. They didn't realize they were looking at the only man who knew how to make a rifle breathe. By late June, the Allied advance had ground to a bloody halt in the hedgerows. The tactical problem was Unteroffizier Vogel and his team of snipers. They held a crossroads that the 29th Infantry Division desperately needed. Standard doctrine dictated a frontal assault supported by mortar fire, but the mortars couldn't find the range in the shifting rain. The emotional weight of this official failure was measured in blood. Corporal Thomas Reed, 22, from Akron, Ohio. He died in the mud trying to spot Vogel's position. In his pocket was a half-finished wooden horse he'd been carving for the 3-year-old son he had never met. Private Leo Miller, only 19, from Buffalo. He was a track star in high school. He was cut down by a single shot to the throat while trying to follow a textbook flanking maneuver. Vance watched these men die from the tall grass. He approached his commanding officer, Captain Montgomery, a man with a pressed collar and a rigid devotion to the chain of command. Vance explained that the standard M73B1 scopes were failing. The humidity was fogging the lenses, and the sun, even behind the clouds, was creating a lethal glare off the glass. Vance showed the captain a discarded Prince Albert tobacco tin he had hammered into a primitive, baffled sunshade. Montgomery didn't see a solution. He saw a violation. If the Ordnance Department wanted you to have a sunshade, Vance, they'd have issued you one. You attach that piece of junk to your Springfield and I'll have you up for a court-martial before the sun sets. Vance went back to his hole. He ignored the order. He knew the geometry of war didn't care about rank. He observed a flaw the West Point strategists had missed. The German snipers were positioned so they could only be targeted from a specific 15-degree angle where the light hit the American optics perfectly, turning every US scope into a signaling mirror. Going rogue was his only option. In the darkness of a rainy foxhole, Silas took his tobacco tin. He cut a precise, jagged aperture into the bottom, blackened the interior with carbon from a lighter, and fitted it over his objective lens. It was ugly, it was unauthorized, and it was the only thing that could kill the glare. He was now operating with zero support, knowing that if he failed, he wasn't just a casualty, he was a criminal. The smell of wet wool and fermented apples from a nearby orchard filled Vance's lungs. The mud sucked at his boots, trying to pull him deeper into the earth. He crawled 200 yards past the safe line, moving like a shadow through the silt. He found his spot. Distance 410 yards. Angle 12 degrees upward. Wind 5 miles per hour, gusting left. He could see Vogel now. The German was confident, his head clear above the stone ledge. Vance adjusted his improvised tin shade. The West Point optics would have flared, alerting Vogel instantly, but the tobacco tin swallowed the light. He exhaled halfway, held, squeezed. The Springfield kicked. The .3006 round traveled the distance in less than half a second. Vogel's coffee cup was still steaming when he slumped over the ledge. Vance didn't stop. He relocated, 6 inches to the left. Re-index. Squeeze. Another German observer fell, then a third. For 2 hours in the pouring rain, Silas Vance worked his way through the German line. He used the civilian logic of a coal miner to dismantle a professional killing machine. 14 shots, 14 kills. By the time the sun went down, the crossroads were clear. The 29th moved forward, their path paved by a man the army had threatened to imprison. The tobacco tin technique eventually made its way into the hands of Army intelligence. Years later, kill flashes and anti-reflective devices would become official doctrine, standard issue for every sniper in the world. But Silas Vance's name was never in the manuals. There was no medal for his unauthorized modification. After the war, he didn't join the VFW or tell stories at the local pub. He went back to the mountains. He had coal to mine and a life to rebuild. To him, the war was just another job that required the right tool, even if you had to make it yourself out of trash. If you found this story compelling, please like this video, subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories.